Hello, everybody. These are bright lights. It's great to be here. I'm a 2018 Mozilla Fellow in Media, Misinformation and Trust. And I'm going to talk about the ads-based business model. I'm happy to do kind of questions at the end about disinformation more generally. I've worked on a number of initiatives, researching Russia, researching ISIS, researching domestics and conspiracy theorists. Happy to talk about that. But one of the things that I try to do is root the disinformation problem in the structural underpinnings. So why we are where we are today. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about. So I'm going to start with something really obvious. Something is wrong on the internet. Our information ecosystem is broken. And in fact, things have gone so off the rails over the last few years that we actually have a whole new lexicon for describing it. So we have misinformation and disinformation, which is false information spread online. And really the thing that separates them is intent. Disinformation is very deliberate. We talk about polarization on Twitter. We talk about radicalization on YouTube. And as we have an election coming up in the US in 10 days, the discussion of these problems have really reached fever pitch. I'm sure y'all saw the news yesterday. We have a pipe bomber radicalized, presumably in Facebook groups. There are so many news cycle actually stories that came out yesterday that I can't pick just one. But the root cause of the problem is actually startlingly simple. And it's that our political conversations are happening on an infrastructure that was built for viral advertising. And we're only beginning to adapt. So when I first moved to the Valley 7 years ago, I was a VC. And hundreds of startups would come into my office, and this was when social mobile local was the big thing. So I would hear all of these pitches for, it's like Facebook, but for moms. And I would say, well, how are you going to monetize that? And nearly every single one of the founders would tell me, well, we're going to run ads. Sometimes they would be even more honest and they say, we're going to gather the data, we're going to repackage it, anonymize it, sell it. And this was the norm 7 years ago. So now we hear that and we think that sounds a little bit creepy, but this was really, nobody really stopped to question that. So ads alone aren't a problem. Companies need to sell product. People want to find things to buy. Ads have powered everything from journalism to network television over the years. But what we started to realize is that when ads migrated to the internet, there was a realization that if they were well targeted, they were very effective. And so when they're well targeted, in order to make them well targeted, they have to be attention grabbing and they have to be relevant. And in order to be attention grabbing and relevant, the person who is running the ad has to know a lot about the user. And this is where the platforms really come into play. So the platforms, the social platforms, were designed to facilitate, they became attention brokers. They are designed to help companies reach users as these sort of middlemen where they know a ton about you, and that's the service that they're offering to the advertisers. So as the social ecosystem grew, it really consolidated into this handful of platforms that was competitive with each other, not based on differentiated feature sets. You know, you go to YouTube and Twitter for very different things, but because their business models were all built on sustained engagement, they had to keep you on site. So they became competitive not because of features, but because they're competing for your time. And so the user experience is really designed to maximize time on site. Engagement is designed to maximize time on site. So we find ourselves in an ecosystem where more and more people spend time on a very, very small number of platforms that are all designed to keep people in one place. And the political conversations, they used to be much more sharing baby pictures, sharing wedding pictures. Gradually, they became the place where we had all of our political conversations as well. And I think the latest statistic is that 60% of people in the US get their news from Facebook. And if you look at ecosystems where Facebook is the internet or where WhatsApp is the internet, that is even more pronounced. So people are not just observing on these platforms, they're creating content as well. And as you have these platforms where people are producing content, you have a glut of information. So for the first time ever, we moved from a period of information scarcity to information glut. And the way that the platforms manage this is they design curatorial algorithms like search, like trending, like recommendation engines that help people make sense of all of the information that they're seeing on those platforms, give you the most personalized, exciting, best experience. At the same time, because one of the things that they want to do is really facilitate sharing, again, driving engagement and seeing what you want to share, what you care so much about that you're willing to share it, we have virality engines. So this is where algorithmic amplification takes things like misinformation and sensationalized content and pushes it out en masse. So to summarize the ecosystem evolution, I look at three things. I see kind of this sort of intersection of three things that happened. Audience consolidation, billions of users on a handful of platforms, personalized targeting, driven to facilitate ads, and gameable algorithms. Again, these curatorial algorithms that they are remarkably effective, but not necessarily very sophisticated. They will show you what you want to see, but they don't have any kind of value judgment. And this is where we see things like radicalization beginning to be an increasing problem, because the recommendation engine does not actually understand what it is suggesting. It just knows that you're likely to like it. So as a result of that kind of intersection of three things, we have an information ecosystem that prioritizes what's popular over what's true. And it's funny because in the work I do, we try to never say the T word, because then you're getting into value judgments. So we talk about information integrity rather than truth. But really, when we're getting down to it, so much of the problem that we have is actually an erosion in this shared epistemological framework. We see two completely different internets in the US, and this is where the polarization problem, the echo chambers, really are reinforced. So the unintended consequences of this is that we have an infrastructure purpose-built for advertising, coupled with vast amounts of personal data, infinite reach, and little to no regulation. So this ecosystem that was built for advertisers is also remarkably effective for propagandists. And that's because propaganda is a marketing campaign for an idea. And so, 7 or 8 years ago, clever people with bad intentions realized that a very small ad buy could deliver a very long-term relationship. So this is something that brand marketers have known for years. Very small ad buy, engaging content, well-targeted. You're going to get people, they're going to like your page, and then you're going to continue to push them things. And so this is the same framework, the same exact framework that we see propagandists using today. So the work that I do looks at kind of 5 core, malign actors is the term. State actors, you've got Russia, you have Iran, you have Saudi Arabia, you have any government that is willing to institute campaigns both of state-sponsored trolling and also of fake news and misinformation. You have terrorists. So a lot of the work that I did in 2015 looked at ISIS, which built a brand on social media, overtly, the black flag, it was everywhere. We have the domestic ideologues. I have, Pepe there, but there are other icons I could have used as well. The true believers, the conspiracy theorists, the spammers who are doing it for financial motivation, they are all using the same core framework because this is what we've built. This is the information ecosystem we've designed. So what are we doing about it? So the spammers were actually the easiest to deal with because nobody likes spammers. Nobody thinks about the free speech rights of spammers. And so tech companies really worked collaboratively to solve the spam problem. They removed financial incentives. They redesigned terms of service. They deprecate clickbait. With ISIS, that was actually surprisingly difficult. Some of the work that we did in 2015, this was when the US government really began to try to engage with the tech platforms to say, we've got to do something about this. And it was a remarkable series of conversations back in 2015 because this was shortly after the Snowden revelation. So the environment was very different. So the tech companies didn't want to be seen as working with or engaging with US government. Meanwhile, the government is saying terrorists are actively recruiting on your platform. What are you doing about it? And then we would have these surreal conversations with civil libertarians who would say one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And then there were those of us who were third-party security researchers in the room like, these are beheading videos, you guys. So there were these passionate appeals to like Mill and Brandeis. We're just going to speak louder than all the bots. We're going to challenge the bad ideas, and freedom of speech is going to win the day. And I think that now in 2018, we have realized that that is not what is happening and that we need to do something fundamentally different. So this is Russia. These are Russian memes from the Internet Research Agency. Happy to talk about that during Q&A, but they achieved worldwide notoriety for successfully masquerading as Americans for a period of 3 years. Their activity, their interference in the 2016 election led to a remarkable shift. This, above all else, is why we're having this conversation. This is why I'm in this room, because the things that we tried to say when it was just domestic conspiracy theorists or just terrorists, when we began to realize that these are state actors using it, there's finally an acknowledgement that these are dual-use technologies. There are militaries using them, there are intelligence services using them, and this is a much bigger problem. This is at this point a national security issue, it's an election integrity issue, and that was something that we weren't willing to internalize 4 years ago. So the last are the passionate ideologues, the true believers, who have realized that anyone can do this with minimal resources, So why not try? So every day we have these power users, spammers and spies, terrorists and ideologues. They get more sophisticated, and so we're in an arms race now, where whack-a-mole is a trite but very apt metaphor, and that's because the ecosystem is such that anyone can do this. And the challenge that we're having as we try to solve it is, where are the lines? What is the line between clicktivism, right? Algorithmic political activity and algorithmic gaming. Where is that line? When Ted Cruz runs ads where you click a button and it tweets verbatim the same thing that Ted Cruz just clicked, it looked like an army of spam bots, but is that just political speech? What's the distinction between a guerrilla marketer and an unethical spammer? How do we atone for and move beyond the internet's original sin? So these are the hard questions that we've just begun to ask ourselves. There are very tough days ahead for major tech companies, for regulators, for people in this room, techies who are building apps, right? And to their credit, I will say over the last 2 years or so, the platforms have really come around. Facebook made some remarkable hires. They have the war room that they did a giant PR push about a couple days ago. You probably read about it. Jack Dorsey showed up and acknowledged that he runs a private public square and is going to have to actually take responsibility for this now. So we've had congressional hearing after congressional hearing. And then a lot of the leading is actually happening by third parties. There's initiatives such as Future Congress. There's the Center for Humane Technology, and they're trying to promote transparency and accountability. They're trying to work with regulators to help get regulators up to speed on the things that we look at. At Mozilla and like-minded organizations like Berkman Klein and actually the EFF2, there's a network of staff and fellows who are trying to collaborate on solutions. The Internet Health Report team is here. Highly recommend if you haven't seen that, you take a look at that. And then there is a really great panel on Sunday morning with another Mozilla Fellow, Camille Francois, called AI's Collateral Damage. So there'll be some more kind of discussion of the stuff that I'm talking about there. And I think everyday users are beginning to realize the disaster that is our information ecosystem. And so one of the reasons why this is a sustained topic of conversation is because there are people who are agitating. There are a network of activists. And then the regulatory conversation, which actually engages quite heavily with the activist community now, is focused on these 4 things, which I don't have time to go into great detail on, but really looking at things like ad transparency. What are the frameworks that we can put in place to help people understand political advertising and what it looks like online? Bot labeling, which I have many thoughts about, but the idea being, again, helping people understand what they're engaging with, particularly as we enter into an era of extremely intelligent AI, chatbots, deepfakes, and a number of other things. How do we think about attaching a provenance for a little bit more of a human versus not human disclosure for online engagement? There's antitrust, the idea that maybe the problem is actually that mass consolidation that I was describing, and maybe the solution is a more fragmented, decentralized kind of return to the early days of the internet. And then privacy, which I feel like I can't tell an audience of people from Europe about because you guys are GDPR is way ahead of anything that we've tackled in the US. But I'll leave you all with this. A lot of the people in this room are founders or creators, and I think we're at a point where we've finally realized that tracking users and maximizing engagement above all else is not the only way. We need to be aware of the unintended consequences of that model. We need to be aware of things like the design decisions that algorithmic recommendation engines are having on society. We need to be thinking about the societal and the downstream impacts of the communities that we're facilitating online. And I think it's time that we need to all, as a community, as techies, really explore more responsible choices. The industry has excelled for years at creating innovative technology and innovative products, and I think it's really time that we start to think about innovative business models. What does the future of social on the internet look like? What is it powered by? I think it's time to prioritize the creation of a digital ecosystem that doesn't accommodate spammers, spies, and ideologues, but is instead really focused on real users and genuine conversation. And happy to take questions. Actually, I have no idea how we are on time. Okay.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I work for a fairly well-known environmental organisation, and we obviously have to raise funds and money to do the things that we do. Sometimes that obviously involves using some of the platforms that we're talking this weekend. I wondered if there's kind of hints or tips you can provide. I mean, you mentioned about, I think, the Internet Health Foundation, kind of getting involved in that, but for NGOs kind of generally, are there other things that you think we should be doing if we're not, say, deeply involved in the tech sector? Is it okay to use Facebook advertising, for example, because that's highly effective for us?
We were actually talking about that right before I went on. I built an advocacy organization myself a couple of years back, a pro-vaccine community, to work on legislation we were trying to get passed in California. And I'm right there with you. I mean, this is the way to grow community. This is the way to grow. These are extremely effective tools. I think one of the challenges is the business community and the large NGOs, Greenpeace and others, have a strong voice and can say, these are the tools that we want to see. These are the tools that we use, but also a recognition that I think there is going to have to be more in the way of checking who's running ads, who's doing this. That's where it's how do we protect privacy and yet at the same time recognize that there has to be some disclosure. Facebook's initial steps on that were really interesting. They now have you registering to run ads. You've done it, I've done it. But one of the things that we see is that there's also these nameless LLCs, and it's a great way to launder information. And so this is where it really becomes, it's an arms race. It's a really big challenge. And so we actually are really relying on them to grow teams internally. And at the same time, Senator Warner and Senator Klobuchar are trying to push the Honest Ads Act to improve disclosure. We see it as, in some ways, like a know your customer framework, the same way the financial industry has. In the financial industry, if you are taking money or you're a bank or you're representing a client, you have to know who they are. And this is where we start to see like maybe large ad buys, very targeted ad buys. These things are going to have to go through more of a process like that.
I was wondering, what can media agencies be doing? Because they're the ones ultimately who are taking the data that's available to them, and then they're seeding it out there and targeting those users based on, their gender, time of day, what food they like. So what can they be doing to ultimately help change this?
I think there have been some conversations with the large advertising agencies. A lot of that has actually been focused on where their ads appear, and that's particularly on YouTube. I think as far as what can they be doing, they also have a kind of a loud voice here. And so you see groups like Unilever, companies like Unilever, advocating for more of a, maybe we don't advertise at night, I think was one of the things that I saw. Maybe we don't advertise at periods when people are, it was sort of an interesting case study. I think the Unilever thing was related to, do you want to like push product to people who are online late at night where like loneliness and depression kind of come into play. And I think that they've been starting to think about what are the industry standards that they're going to put in place, much like things like environmental standards have come through from big companies really looking at it in that model. And so they are beginning to take those steps. I work with them a little bit less. I don't engage with the advertising kind of bulk buyers as much, but that's my understanding of where things are going there.
What surprised you most when you were doing your research into the way ISIS operate online?
They're very charismatic and they produce engaging content. There's I have one deck that has the video that they made. That was a still from it, actually, that the meme I put up. I'm totally blanking on the name of their video now. It looks like, I don't know how old the people in this room are, but I remember when I was a kid going to the movies and there would be this ad roll for joining the Marines, and it'd be like the Marines fighting the fire beast. Does anybody else in this room remember the ad of the, okay, good. That's what it looks like. It's engaging, there's charisma, it's remarkably effective content. It's not half-baked crappy memes, it's good stuff, and that's the problem. And it was the same thing with Russia. I can't tell you how many Russian memes I've looked at this point. Some of them are really funny. And I think that one of the things we try to do is like diminish that. And if you diminish that, you're just not like respecting the seriousness of what you're up against. And And so that's where I think sometimes the way that we mock it in the media, but it's actually very well done and it resonates with the target audience, and that's all that matters.
So on that, you obviously have looked at a lot of like trolling content, and I think like the psychology of that is fascinating because it is so effective and compelling. I guess I just wanted to know if you had any other comments or observations on why that might be, or what else you sort of observed in looking at all of that.
I think what's remarkable about Russia is how effective it was. I mean, I don't know how many of you read the Mueller indictment, or it wasn't Mueller, it was the state of Virginia, the last indictment that came out about a week and a half ago. The granularity of that the ad content wasn't what mattered. The ads are such a tiny piece of this. I think the latest pages that Facebook pulled down yesterday, the Iranian pages, $100 and spend 500,000 followers on a page, right? There's the correlation is not, the ads are not the problem. The problem is that they get people to like the page through a series of like inauthentic engagement, inauthentic dissemination. We're really always after the platforms to look at dissemination for evidence of inauthenticity. It's hard to grow a 500,000 member page. But what they do is they create compelling content that drives people to reshare it. So it's really the organic engagement that's the problem. It's actually the virality. It's actually the users referring in other users. I think the other thing that's remarkable about it is the extent to which they create what we call these like media mirages, in the sense that they cross-link all of their pages. What we saw with Russia was all of the pages targeting the Black community were incredibly well integrated, incredibly well networked. They all had Twitter accounts, YouTubes. They were building brands, and they were building specifically like media entities. And so what they did was they created an environment where you like one page, you sync up with one page, and then all of a sudden they're cross-promoting another page. So you think you're going and liking some independent Instagram account that also happens to be really into Black culture, and that's also owned by the IRA. And so it creates this like encapsulation almost, where you are in a media environment that is entirely manufactured, that shows you like very normal like Black culture content for a very long time, and then hits you with like a meme that's off, a little more radicalizing. And so it's a very sustained long-term relationship that is developed over a very long period of time, and that's how it's done.
Great. Renee, thank you.
Thank you.